Hello, this video will help you find regulations. Regulations come from the executive branch of government, and they're created by federal agencies. They're actually very similar to statutes in lots of ways. In fact, one might think of regulations as miniature statutes. They sort of fill in the blanks of statutes and are much more day-to-day, nitty-gritty kinds of laws. They change much more quickly than statutes, and they're very public policy oriented. Regulations cannot exist without statutes. Congress makes a big general law, and then they cede some of their lawmaking power to a federal agency, which writes regulations describing the law that Congress has just passed. So if you've already got a statute, you might already have regulations that come from this statute. For example, I have a statute already pulled up on LexisNexis Academic. This is not a particularly interesting statute in this case. It in fact exists only to make it possible for regulations to be made. But if we scroll down and look at the annotations, we'll see that the regulations that come from this statute are hyperlinked for us, and we could go take a look at them. Remember, one good legal document often leads you to other good legal documents. If you do not already have a statute, though, you can certainly look for regulations from the beginning. It's important to know where to look for regulations. They actually show up in multiple places. The most important place would be the Code of Federal Regulations. We're going to start, like statutes, on the website of FDSIS, the Federal Digital System from the United States Government Printing Office. We'll choose Browse Government Publications. And as you can see, here's the Code of Federal Regulations. Once again, codes are organized according to topic, and they should always be current. So the Code of Federal Regulations should contain all regulations that are currently in force, and it will be organized by topic. However, regulations throughout the course of their life are published at least twice before they ever make it to the Code of Federal Regulations. They're published in the Federal Register. The Federal Register is more or less a daily newspaper of all of the federal agencies. I selected Federal Register, and from here I'll choose today's issue of the Federal Register. It comes out every business day, and as you can see, it's divided up by individual agency. Today, there is in fact a rule for the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive Bureau. If we take a look at it, we'll see the page. As I said, regulations are published at least twice. They will be published as proposed regulations first. That is, a set of regulations that might come into force and an invitation to comment on them. If you're interested in public policy, you may wish to comment on regulations. After that, they may be rewritten and published as proposed regulations again. At some point in the process, though, they will be complete and they'll be published as final regulations, including notices of what the comments were and how they were reacted to. Once they've been published as final regulations, in this case we are looking at final regulations, they will be broken up and organized into the Code of Federal Regulations. If we wanted to, we could look at earlier editions of the Federal Register. On the website of FDSIS, we can go back to 1994, looking at old materials. If we're looking for the law currently in force, we would go to the Code of Federal Regulations. Like statutes, we'll choose the most recent available year and select Go. In this case, only one title has been published for 2014, so we'll want to go a year earlier and see what's available. We could, if we wish to, do some guesswork the same way we did when we were searching from statutes. The Alcohol, Tobacco Products, and Firearms title looks promising. However, regulations do tend to have less easy-to-use names. In this case, I know that our section is in the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, Department of Justice, but it's not obviously named so that you would know that. It's definitely easier if you already have a statute for regulation. I could then open Firearms and Ammunition here. Commerce in Firearms and Ammunition, and look at the section on licenses. Once again, I have the option to look at it either as just a standard web page, or I can look at the PDF, the actual picture of the Code of Federal Regulations book. Remember, each regulation or set of regulations needs to have a statute that authorizes it. So if you go to the beginning of any set of regulations and scroll down past the table of contents, you will see an authority note that tells you which statute or statutes have made this possible, and a source note which tells you where in the Federal Register it was initially published. You may also wish to look at a different version. The Code of Federal Regulations on the state government website can be a little difficult to use. In that case, I would recommend a source called Hein Online. It's on the main page of the Law Library, but you can also find it from the main library's page if you want to. Having chosen Hein Online, you can see that there's lots of options, including the Federal Register and the Code of Federal Regulations. If you wish to use any of these, you simply select the year, select your title. In this case, we're interested in Title 27. Select your part, which would be Commerce in Firearms and Ammunition, and you can choose Go to Part. It takes you directly to the part you're interested in, and if you have statutes or the Federal Register citations, it will link you there so that you can go look at them in Hein Online as well. Hein Online can be a little bit difficult to navigate, so you might not want to start there. It's a source that's easy to use when you go in looking for a known item. If you wish to search for regulations, you might well want to go back and use LexisNexis Academic. From the main page of LexisNexis Academic, this is a very similar search to the one we did for statutes. We'll start with search by content type and then choose Federal Statutes and Regulations. From here, we could do the same thing that we did with statutes and choose CFR and look at the table of contents as we did on FDsys. However, since regulations are longer and more involved than statutes, it might be a good idea to run a search, especially since they have difficult to use titles. I've now unselected everything but the Code of Federal Regulations, so I'll be looking only in there. And then I'm going to use this box to build an advanced search. This should be similar to the search that we used when we were looking for case law. So at this point, I'm looking for any version of the word license. That's what the exclamation point is for. It will find me license and licenses and licensing and licensed, any version of that word. I want it to be within 5 words of either firearm or gun. If I click Apply, it adds it to my search box, and once again I'm searching only within the Code of Federal Regulations. This still comes up with a fair number of results, 126, which may be more than I want to look through. Remember, you can use that Search Within Results bar to narrow it down. So I want only the ones that say gun control somewhere in there. And if I scroll down a little, I can see that the regulation I was interested in is number 11 on the list. My search terms have been highlighted, both the original ones and the ones from my Search Within Result box. You can also find regulations on state government websites. So here is the state government website for Indiana. I'll choose the Law and Justice tab, scroll down a little, and in the middle of the page choose Resources. Laws and Administrative Code. One thing to know about regulations is that another name for them would be an administrative code, in addition to a code of regulations. If you see administrative code, you're talking about regulations. On the Indiana website, it's under Publications. So I'll select that and then choose Administrative Code. The Indiana Administrative Code is not as well organized as one might hope. The titles that deal with different issues just come as they were passed. So you've got all sorts of different subjects thrown in. If you want, it might be best to run a search in this case. As it happens, you might not find much for a particular subject. Regulations deal only with what they're permitted to deal with, and in this case, there are no regulations in Indiana on gun control, though if you are interested in regulations that deal with guns more generally, they are there. So for example, the Indiana State Police Department does have regulations about firearms licensing for use by police officers. Every state website is going to be different. If you would like to make sure that you get directly to either the statutes or the regulations on each website, I would recommend that you use a source called LLSDC, the Law Librarian Society of Washington, D.C. You can find it just by Googling LLSDC. They have a source called the Legislative Sourcebook. If we select this and then scroll down a little bit, we can see state legislatures, state laws, and state regulations, website links, and telephone numbers. This source goes state by state and tells you how to get to the legislature's page, how to find the statutes of that state, and how to find the regulations of that state, all from one particular website. It can be very helpful. I hope that you've found this video helpful, and good luck with your research.